Broadcasting from Silicon Valley, California, this is Conversations with Jennylyn.
Thank you for watching Conversations with Jennylyn. Today, my guest is Jim Chu. Jim is a Bay Area, Silicon Valley, California attorney. And during this lockdown, he has done some research on COVID-19 and has put together his findings. I want to make it clear that Jim has told me he is not an expert. So what he's sharing is what he's found doing his research, and he's open to correction. So Jim, welcome to Conversations with Jennylyn.
Yeah, it's great to be here. It's weird being on this side of the camera when I'm usually on the other side of the camera for you, Jennylyn.
I know, it's kind of cool to have you on the camera in front of it. So Jim, you've come up with some very interesting COVID-19 findings after doing the research. And so today I decided, since you've done the work, so let you lead the way with what you have found out in doing your research.
Oh, that's great. What I've concluded is that, I think most cases of the illness are transmitted indoors, and likely it's indoors in enclosed, poorly ventilated spaces. I don't know if any expert will dispute that. I think there were some early studies in China that basically concluded that like over 99% of the early Chinese Wuhan cases were transmitted indoors versus outdoors. Mm-hmm. The other thing I've probably concluded, and this is yet to be confirmed, but I think the science is kind of going that way, is that the illness is transmitted airborne. It is airborne, transmitted by small droplets or aerosolized particles. And the basis for that is that when this illness first broke out, the consensus was that the illness was transmitted primarily through large droplets of water, and therefore the best way to mitigate against the spread of the illness was to socially distance and cough into your elbow. You remember this, right?
Yes.
And so if it was primarily transmitted through large droplets of water, then socially distancing and coughing into your elbow and wearing masks would have probably stopped the transmission of the illness. And what we've discovered is that even more places that did have mask mandates, that did enforce strict lockdowns and social distancing, are now having a resurgence of cases despite the mask wearing. So, and the theory that I have is that the illness is transmitted primarily in households, for people at home, and it's airborne, and it happens when people are indoors with a potentially infected home member, and they breathe into the air, they're stuck indoors, and the air is poorly ventilated or circulated. So as people breathe, as an infected person breathes into the air inside, the concentration of the virus increases over time, and that's what leads to the transmission, currently is leading to the transmission of the illness.
So people are probably getting burnt out on this COVID thing. People are said to me, oh, when are you going to stop doing those interviews? And to me, I don't see the need to stop because the virus has not gone away. And like you said, we have seen a lot of resurgences around the world. And I think in the US, we are preparing for a resurgence probably when the fall and the winter starts. Right. So I think this information you're sharing with us, I think right now is critical. And I'm really happy that you took the time to do this.
Right.
So I'll let you continue.
Well, because it's primarily spread airborne and indoors, the thought occurred to me that there's a reason why it doesn't transmit as easily outdoors. And I'm thinking most of the research that I've seen, or most of the scientists that I've asked about this, have concluded that the reason it doesn't spread as readily outdoors is because there's more ventilation. By definition, you're breathing out into a larger volume of space than you are indoors. So the virus, if you breathe it out outdoors, is diffused over a larger volume of space, which means that there's the concentration of the virus in any particular cubic feet of air is less. And the other thing that what I think the Department of Homeland Security was able to confirm is that UVB radiation in direct sunlight deactivates the virus fairly quickly in the air. And I believe there's a DHS study which has been submitted for peer review, which suggests that direct sunlight will deactivate 50% of the virus in about 90 seconds to 2 minutes. And it will deactivate like 99% of the virus in about 15 to 20 minutes. So the theory, so basically if you're outdoors, the sunlight has already disinfected or deactivated any of the virus that anyone's has breathed out. If anyone's breathing out the virus, the sunlight immediately starts to deactivate the virus, and the air gets spread out over time, so that even if you incidentally run into somebody outdoors, you're breathing in fewer virus particles, and therefore you're less likely to be infected. So
maybe this is why we hear when they've had gatherings, that's when you get a lot of cases. You know, you hear of incidents where people went to church, a whole group of them, and by the next couple of weeks, they have a whole bunch of cases amongst those people.
It's possible. I mean, my suspicion is that if you're indoors for an extended period of time with a large number of people, or just with any one infected person, the longer you are indoors, the more likely you're going to be infected if there's someone in the room that's infected with you. And my suspicion is that the reason the mask mandates do not appear to be working in a lot of places is because when people are at home, they don't wear the mask, right? If you're at home I mean, I don't know if you're at home, but you know, I'm in my office right now, but I'm not wearing a mask because there's nobody here, right? But I'm thinking if you're with your family, you're with your family, and you're not wearing a mask with your family because, you know, they're your family. So if you're in a multi-generational household, if you have a lot of people in your household and you're at home, you're stuck at home all day, you're not wearing a mask, and you have all the windows closed because either it's A, very cold in the winter, or B, it's really hot in the summer, you have the AC going, that you're more likely to get it because someone is breathing into the air. The longer they're in the enclosed space breathing in the air, the more the increased viral load, or the higher the concentration of the virus, the more likely you're going to breathe in the virus and get infected. So,
sorry.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
So did you take a look at the test? Because, you know, everyone is saying get tested, because if you get tested, then even if you are asymptomatic, you can protect someone else. But you could get tested today, and tomorrow you can come in contact with it and pick it up and still remain asymptomatic. So what did you find in your research about the tests?
I didn't do too much research on the tests, other than I think that there are studies that suggest that about 80% of the population is already immune to the virus based on exposure to prior coronaviruses like the common cold or the flu. But that means that there's about 20% of us that still can get infected. And even if you do the math, let's say 50% of those people are going to be asymptomatic, then that leaves about 10% of the population that could be hurt. So the United States has a population of 330 million people. 10% of 330 million people is 33 million. So, right, it's the numbers that, you know, we don't, that are not necessarily a good thing. But in terms of testing, you know, I haven't really done research into that, just simply because, you know, I don't think necessarily that testing is a great indication of how badly disease is spread, because A, we're not testing everybody. And then two, the more interesting thing is that when this pandemic first started, we locked down. The reason for the lockdown was to flatten the curve, not eliminate the curve. And the reason you want to flatten the curve is you want to reduce the number of people that get infected at any one period of time, but you accept the fact that at the end of the day, when this is all over, the same number of people will get infected. It just takes longer to infect them. So, you know, by spreading out the number of people infected at any one moment in time, you don't overwhelm the hospitals. That's what they told us at the beginning. So, you know, absent a vaccine, however many number of people are going to get infected are going to get infected.
Right.
Right. So, so the thing is, if more people test positive now, that's not necessarily a bad thing as long as more people aren't dying or more people aren't being hospitalized for serious illnesses. And so that was the big debate with Sweden, is whether or not, you should just let everybody get infected and then let the pandemic burn itself out. And I think we're still in debate about that, even though Sweden was one of the few countries that's not currently experiencing a resurgence of a second wave. So take that for what it's worth.
But they lost a lot of lives in the beginning because they didn't quarantine. So maybe that was a good thing, a bad thing then, but it's actually paying off now.
I think that's the trade-off they made. The interesting thing is that if you compare it to New York, the state of New York, if you adjust for population, I think New York has the rate of death in New York is 3 times that of Sweden. And their curve is pretty much identical in terms of when the deaths occurred, when the spike occurred of deaths and hospitalizations. But you notice that New York locked down. New York, completely locked down. Sweden did not. And the results are pretty much the same. So, and now
how do you explain that?
New York probably was a little late in locking down, and so the virus had already spread. And also the fact that by locking down in New York, which is a highly dense populated area, you had all these people at home in very small apartments in high density housing, like apartment buildings or whatever, so that even if you're not infected or your family's not infected, there's somebody in the apartment next door to you that's infected, and the air is, you're sharing kind of the same air, it's not well circulated. Or if it's in multi-generational poor households in New York, essential workers still had to work. So if you tend to be in a multi-generational poor household with essential workers, they're still out there, still working, and they're exposing each other. They come home, they spread it to their family members. And so again, you could not stop the spread of the virus. The purpose of the lockdown was just to slow it down. And so I think we're discovering that right now. I mean, I think the saying on Twitter is the virus is going to virus. You can't stop it, you can only slow it down.
Yeah, it's in control, not us. The virus is in control. I think personally, based on my knowledge of New York, that one of the reasons why they have had so many and are still having so many cases is because I would say a large percentage of people in New York get around on public transportation. And they're so crammed into those spaces, I believe, because I've used the public transportation in New York, and I always marvel at how many people they can get into those carriages. And I have a strong gut feeling that's contributing to the volume of cases there.
Oh, that very well could be. New York did not sterilize or sanitize its train cars until about 5 weeks after the lockdown started in New York City. And also that they ran the subways and they didn't socially distance on the subway. So yeah, that very well could be the case.
Plus, they didn't make wearing masks mandatory either at that time.
Well, my theory I'm a little skeptical on masks. I think because if you're wearing a cloth mask or a surgical mask, which is pretty much a form of paper mask, they will stop large droplets, because you could just see you could see the videos of people sneezing and coughing and with the mask on, without the mask. But you've noticed places like Mexico, the Philippines, California, that had mask mandates, and certain places strictly enforce the mask mandates. They're still experiencing spikes now. And so that leads me to the conclusion that the virus can be spread by aerosolized particles or smaller droplets, which studies have shown will actually go through a cloth mask. I mean, the only real mask that you can get that might prevent or protect you is a N95, KN95 mask, and that will filter out 95% of the particles. But I think most people who wear them say they're very difficult to breathe in.
Oh yes, I cannot breathe with it. I have some, but I feel like I'm passing out with it.
Yeah.
And I think the reason that people are choosing to wear the fabric masks is because it allows you to breathe better.
Yeah, but it also means that the pores are bigger in the cloth mask. I think are about 100 microns and larger in the cloth mask. I think the virus itself is 0.125 microns, and the droplets that the virus can be in can be as small as 1 micron, and the smaller droplets are less than 5 microns. So basically, if you do the math, 5 microns versus 100 micron size pore in a hole in a cloth mask, or it's like, again, it's like trying to stop a mosquito with a chain link fence is what they say on Twitter.
Did you ever think in our lifetime we'd experience anything like this? I mean, there's so many new variables. There's so many new, what is looking like it's going to become a norm. It's so weird for me when I'm out and all I can see on everyone are their eyes. I heard people go, hey, and I don't even know who's saying hey to me. Because I
would not have anticipated
them without this part of the face.
I would not have anticipated this, but I do remember reading internet articles about the Great Spanish Influenza of 1918, and that's the closest equivalent that we have. I think most people are saying that this particular pandemic is probably not as bad as the 1918 Spanish influenza. It might be the equivalent of the Asian flu in 1969. So we'll see. I mean, I'm hoping that we can recover. I think the fact that we're more aware of pandemics probably means that we're going to react a bit more extensively than they did in 1969, where they just figured, well, there's no way we can stop this. Might as well just do our thing. And we just accepted the loss back in 1969, and we accepted a huge loss in 1918, but I'm not thinking we're going to get there yet. But
I hope not. Yeah. So have you heard that the Russians have a vaccine?
Oh, I've heard the Russians have a vaccine, but I'm skeptical, because I think what they did was they skipped the normal phase 3 of vaccine testing. I guess phase 1, you just tested on a few people to see if there's any adverse reactions, right? Make sure it does no harm. Phase 2, you expand it to maybe a few dozen or maybe 100 people to make sure it produces antibodies or whatever. And in that group of people. And then phase 3, you just test a whole bunch of people just to make sure it really, really works, and that phase 1 and phase 2 weren't just freaks of overly small sample sizes. They just skipped phase 3. So it'd be nice if it worked, but I'm skeptical. And I'm also skeptical just about vaccines against a virus in general, because we've had the flu bug, we've had flu shots for decades, and at best they're only like about 30, 40% effective. And this is, even though this is not the flu, the virus comes from the same family of viruses as the flu and the common cold. At least that's what I've been told. If I'm wrong, let me know.
What do you think about people who are saying we haven't had as many corona deaths in the United States as we're claiming? That the numbers, like the Chinese have been accused of fudging the numbers to look less related to corona. And then I hear a lot of talk about the numbers being fudged in the US to look more than the actual deaths from corona, because apparently when someone dies in a hospital from the coronavirus in the US, the hospital gets $39,000. Well, I've read this. So tell me what you think about this, Jim.
I've read the same thing. I'm inclined to believe it, but I don't know to the extent that it's a problem. The reason I believe it is because you've had various state health department experts in various states basically admit that if anybody who dies that has a positive test is listed as a coronavirus death. So you've had various county and state health department directors basically say, yeah, that's how we count them. If you have a positive test and you die, you're listed as a death, as caused by the illness. Even if it's like you died in a car accident, even if you died of a gunshot wound, even if you're George Floyd, who apparently had a positive test and he clearly died of something else. I don't know if Minnesota did list him as a coronavirus death, but people said that, yeah, he could have been listed as a coronavirus death, which is kind of disturbing.
Yeah, it's crazy. But when you think of how much energy they have to put into like trying to cure people, what testing method did they have to accurately measure who's actually dying from this? Because I could have COPD and be tested for the coronavirus, but how do you determine which one kills me if I die?
Oh, no, you don't. You just, again, the way they do it is if you have a positive test for the virus, and you die, you're presumed to have died of the coronavirus. You count as a death, even if you died of a gunshot wound or a motorcycle accident, or you committed suicide, or you died of alcohol poisoning. I mean, there are stories in various states where people totally admitted this. So I don't know exactly. I mean, I think at one point in late April, early May, I think Deborah Birx estimated as high as 25% of all reported deaths are probably not related, or not caused by the virus. So I don't know. I mean, but I do tend to believe that we're overestimating the deaths because hospitals probably do get more compensation under the CARES Act than they do if they died of something else. And hospitals, because of the lockdown, were not treating other procedures. So they were taking a revenue hit because they weren't treating elective surgeries or other conditions. So might as well just get the extra money. There's a monetary incentive. And I don't think any hospital is going to deny it. They'll probably deny lying. And that's, I deny lying too, but that's just the way it is. But I mean, my take on it is that I think there are measures that businesses and individuals can take that might mitigate the spread of the virus by reducing the viral load that we can easily do now. One of the things that I think that anybody can do or most people can do is purchase an air purifier with a HEPA filter. The HEPA filter is rated to remove 99.97% of all particles as small as 0.3 microns. Most people have a mistaken belief that if a particle is smaller than 0.3 microns, it won't work. And that's a misnomer. According to the EPA, 0.3 microns is the optimal particle size to actually go through a HEPA filter. So anything larger or smaller than 0.3 microns, a HEPA filter is more effective than the 99.97% in removing the particles. So a HEPA filter should theoretically remove the virus from the air, and you can just get one at any store. They vary in price, right? And so that will at least keep the concentration of the virus indoors lower than it would be, because it keeps someone from just increasing the viral concentration by just breathing into a poorly circulated space. I think that's the easy one. The harder sell is to replace certain light bulbs with UVB lights. UVB is the part of direct sunlight that deactivates the virus. It also helps the human body convert cholesterol in the skin into vitamin D, which improves your immune response, improves your immunity. But it also can prolong exposure to UVB radiation, cause skin cancer and macular degeneration. But, it's like being outside in the sun. So what do you do when you're out in the sun? You put on sunscreen on the exposed parts of your body. You wear clothing to cover the rest. You wear glasses to protect your eyes. And I think that's easy to do and you can replace UVB bulbs in regular light sockets. So just replace a bulb in your home, and then that should theoretically continually deactivate the virus. And if you have somebody in a room who's breathing into the room and they leave the room, within 15 minutes, 99% of the virus will be gone. So I think, a lot of businesses could probably use UVB lights in just one or two of their light fixtures to purify the indoor air, tell their customers in advance that there's UVB lights. So, provide free sunscreen and maybe some clear UVB protecting glasses to protect them, or just have shade indoors, to protect them directly from the light. And then have air purifiers that will reduce the load. And then the question for air purifiers is, will the air purifier purify the air quick enough relative to the rate that someone is shedding the virus? And I haven't been able to find any research as to the rate in which someone sheds a particle if they're contagious versus how quickly the air purifier can remove it. I can generally tell you that air purifiers are rated for how often they will cleanse the air in an entire room per hour. So like if you have an air purifier that has air exchange rate, ACH rate of 4, that means that it cleanses the air 4 times an hour. So once every 15 minutes, it completely replaces the air if the air change rate is 4. More expensive ones like the Dyson air purifiers, I think, they have an air exchange rate of 8 times an hour. So once every 7.5 minutes, it will completely purify all the air in a room of its rated size in 7.5 minutes. And I think the CDC basically says that, incidental exposure isn't going to get you. They believe that 15 minutes of prolonged exposure to an infected person is what it takes to get you infected. So I'm thinking if you can replace the air every 7.5 minutes, that might prolong the amount of time that you get infected. And if you have the UVB bulbs on top of it, then you are deactivating 50% of the virus in 90 seconds to 2.5 minutes. And so you have two things going on at the same time, and it's a multi-layered approach. And so so theoretically, hopefully it reduces the viral load in an enclosed indoor space. It replicates the same conditions in the outdoors that makes it less likely for the illness to transmit. I could be wrong. This is just, again, I'm not an expert, but it'd be nice if someone would tell me this is wrong and this is why.
Well, that's what I wanted to ask you next. During your research, and by the way, I'm sure there are people out there going, he's a lawyer, why is he doing this? I know why you're doing it, because whether we're a lawyer, we're a carpenter, we work on the road, we have to protect ourselves. So we are all responsible for finding out the facts. But while you were doing your research, did you find a lot of published conflicting reports, or did you find that most of the research most of the information that you found during the research was similar?
Well, here's the thing. I think for anything prior to the breakout of the pandemic, I think the research was pretty consistent, but it wasn't about the virus itself. It was about analogs, be it the flu virus, the SARS virus, the MERS virus. And the interest, and I think right now, because everyone got interested in this particular virus, now all of a sudden you had conflicting research out, and just because everyone paid attention to it and everyone wants to make a name for themselves, and you had a bunch of hastily put together studies.
Right.
The interesting ones are the ones on hydrochloroquine, HCQ. Because we had studies that basically said HCQ doesn't work. We have ones that say they do work. Some of them are not randomly, they're not random clinicalized trials. Some of them are, but then you look at the methodology and you figure, well, it doesn't follow the theory or the hypothesis, which is,
right.
That hydrochloroquine, if you take it early on, before early onset symptoms, if you take it with azithromycin and zinc, will help you get over the illness, but you have to take it early. And so a lot of the randomized early studies basically tested it on people who were not early symptoms. They were very late symptoms. They're people who were already on ventilators, right? Or you had people that didn't take it with the other two items, zinc and azithromycin. Or you had studies that basically just completely fabricated the data, like the one in Lancet, basically said, which concluded that hydrochloroquine causes heart problems. And then when they looked at the study and they tried to replicate the data, they turned out that the people who did the study completely made up the data. It was completely fabricated.
Are you kidding?
No, I'm not kidding.
They made it up and published it.
Oh, they made it up and published it. I don't know why they would do that, because eventually people get caught.
Yeah, you can refute it eventually when you've got the facts.
Right. There was another study about the health effects of hydrochloroquine from from Oxford, and they basically gave doses of hydrochloroquine which people knew were not safe. It basically 3 times the recommended dosage of it. Now, I don't know if hydrochloroquine will actually work in protecting against curing from complications from the virus, but what I do know is that they did prescribe the hydrochloroquine for decades for malaria, and people weren't dying of heart disease or heart attacks or cardiac arrest from hydrochloroquine when they prescribed it for malaria or lupus. And so it tells me that it's at least safe. Whether or not it works, who knows, right? I mean, I don't, again, I'm not a scientist, but I can at least do research and basically tell that, yes, people were taking hydrochloroquine for malaria for like decades before this thing broke out. So to me, that means it's relatively safe. It may not be perfectly safe, but then again, neither is aspirin. So, I mean, in general, even though I'm not an expert, one of the things you can tell if someone is pulling the wool over your eyes is, well, what did they say previously? right? And if they said something different, well, was it based on new evidence, or what's that new evidence? And I think, even if you're not an expert in the field, you can tell what people have said in studies, or you can what people said previously and compare it to what they're saying now. And I think that's, so even if I'm not an expert, I can at least do that. And that's the basis of what I've looked by my research, is what people have said previously, what people have said now. So I may not be an expert, but I'm more than happy to be. I entertain the fact that I could be wrong.
You've done a great job for not being an expert, Jim. And I know you're a lawyer. You're not going to publish what what is obvious to be erroneous. So I am grateful that you spent the time doing what you did. We're down to 5 minutes.
Okay.
As you know, the time flies when you're having fun.
It does. Time flies when you're having fun, and I'm in a hula shirt. So.
Before we wrap this interview up, what have you learned about Jim?
About Jim?
Like this pandemic has forced us all into some form of introspection. Have you learned anything new about yourself?
Well, let's see here. I think the lack of social contact is one of those things where I realize that it does have an effect. I always figured, well, maybe I could just be some shut-in for the rest of my life, surf the internet, play video games, have some other bad habits, order out, take out food, and just watch TV all the rest of my life. Well, I might be able to do that for a good chunk of my life, but I don't think I can do it for the extent that I'm doing now. I do miss friends. I do miss family. I do miss doing things. Even though I might be a relative eccentric loner, well, I'm still a social creature, and I think most human beings are. And I think the emotional, societal, and economic costs are probably more than just what we're protecting ourselves against. And I think we're getting to that point where society will not be able to persist in its current state for an indefinite period of time. And I think we're getting closer and closer to that period of time where society snaps. And that's what has me somewhat concerned.
Yeah, it's weird. I have a girlfriend who, she's an esthetician, and she said, the government says we can go and cut hair outdoor, do our facials, everything outside. She goes, I'm looking for volunteers to do a bikini wax in the park.
There you go. Well, just put curtains around you. Just put curtains
and she says if the police comes, I'll say the government told me to do it outside,
Well, no, just put, if you have curtains around you and the ceilings there, you're technically outside.
Exactly.
Or use screen doors like people wear, like the knit yarn masks. That's my mask, right? There you go.
Yeah, it's really sad. Like you said, for all the reasons you listed, missing interaction with people. And when you do go out to places where you encounter people, they're running. I cannot get used to that. People running away from you, could feel them distancing. Not that I impose myself in people's spaces, but there are people who are really taking this thing seriously. You're walking out in the park and they see you coming and they start running 10 miles the other way. I cannot get used to that, but I understand why they're doing it.
Yeah, I'm hoping that we'll get over this thing. I don't know if there's going to be a second wave or not. I hope there isn't, or if there is, I hope it's not as severe as it was in April. I think if it was as bad as it was like in July, we can deal with it. And I'm hoping that we can reopen sooner rather than later, because again, if you have like 50% of the population that can't work or takes a hit, you can't sustain this for a while. Not everyone can work from home, and not everyone, right? And not everyone can make a living working from home. That's kind of the sad thing about it. So we got to get out, because again, being stuck at home is going to drive people crazy. It's like being in prison, not as bad, but still pretty bad.
There is an element of that, seriously. And I have to say, I think we're going to have a resurgence. And the reason I say that is because I've worked in healthcare for the majority of my life. And you always see between end of September through January, a lot of people sick with the flu.
Well,
so
I'm hoping.
Fear is this is probably going to pop its head up now, because the cold weather and the whatever causes the flu season to rise at that time will still be present. And now we have this really vicious virus on the
I'm hoping that if we can get air purifiers that HEPA filters deployed in every home, that we can reduce that, right? And maybe a UVB light in every home too, because a UVB also, again, UVB light will help the body create vitamin D and improve our immune system and deactivate the virus. And just having having the air purifiers will reduce the number of virus particles in the air, and hopefully that means fewer people getting sick. It's not a guarantee that no one's going to get sick, because I don't think even vaccines aren't foolproof. But I'm thinking if we can reduce the number sufficiently that we can go back to normal or closer to normal, like Sweden, then maybe we won't all have to be poor and rioting in the streets. That's the hope.
Jim, we're out of time, and this is perfect ending. Thank you so very much for taking the time.
Thank you, Jennylyn. I hope you're happy with the show.
I am very happy with it. Let's hope it will help people. That's my whole point of doing this.
Well, prove me wrong. That's what I'm hoping for. Someone tells me you're wrong, and this is why. But thanks a lot, Jennylyn. Take care.
And thank you for watching Conversations with Jennylyn. When a conversation is all you need to be inspired, and Jim has done a lot of homework to help us. So hopefully you will learn something from this episode that you weren't aware of about this corona and how to take care of yourself. And I will see you next time. Thank you.